Thank you. Can you hear me if I hold this thing here? This is the last day to talk to me about technology. The computers in the clinic were just done, and so I don't like them at all. But here's the deal. I have the luxury of, and I'll try to keep it to the point, about 15 minutes, to talk about the medical side of planning for how I want my end, let's say, months, years to look like. And there's a lot of legal things that can go into that, but I think I'm hoping a lot of you already have power of attorney for healthcare documents done, filled out, finished. Higher hands, I got old eyes. Perfect, thank you. In the group, is there a big desire or want to know about how the power of attorney for healthcare, I'll just say POA for healthcare, are used, when they're put together, that kind of thing? Is there a big need for that? Or is there more of an interest in how do I talk to my people? How do I talk to my own brain as far as what I want my death to look like going forward? What questions do I ask my medical people? What do I tell my powers of attorney, my family? Is that more interesting than the nuts and the bolts of the paper? Yes?
I'd like to know about the difference between power of attorney and durable.
That's a question for me later.
Yes. There are two differences. One is finances, one's health, and all I know about is health stuff. So let's focus on the medical things and the questions and how to work through my own thoughts. Some of my patients, many of my patients, and I'm hoping that the knowledge is spreading, hopefully for you too, that when I am asked, do I have a power of attorney for healthcare? A lot of people fear that when they name, let's say, spouse and then kid as my voice, that as soon as I sign on that dotted line, I am useless to my medical team. Is that a true or false statement? Yes. So many people fear that once they sign, then they have no input. And in Wisconsin, we're kind of a weird state compared to some of the others, where once we get that document already signed, tucked in, I call it insurance papers, insurance policies for when and if I need it. And so it's like your car insurance, your house insurance. You put those papers away and they mean nothing until, it used to be 2 doctors, but now it's a doctor and or a nurse practitioner or a psychologist actually do a face-to-face visit, an examination with you in the moment, and both individuals decide that you cannot make a good decision for yourself consistently going forward. That second step is called incapacitation, and there's a separate sheet of paper that provider needs to sign before person 1, person 2 become your voice. Old news for you guys? Okay, I'm liking this. So many of my families who have done these documents in years past, I ask, do you have the power of attorney for your loved one? Oh, yeah. Has it been activated? And I get this blank look of, I don't know. And so sometimes that's a surprise as families are moving forward making plans for their loved ones. So, okay, documents done, legal stuff done. What kinds of things can we ask our people to think for us? The papers are very simple. Put me in a nursing home, put me in an assisted living, make a decision about tube feedings and fluids. Check, sign, we're done. The magic of it is that this document is only a key so that when that time comes, your people who know you, and I'll pick on family, but they don't have to be family members. They can be your best friends, they can be your neighbors, they can be somebody that you grew up with in Alaska. As long as you still have cell phones and you have ways of communicating with them, they don't have to be there in person. And some people get confused about that too. But the question is, that medical team can now talk to that person. That's what you're giving that person, the responsibility, that gift, that privilege of being. So it does no good if you sign the papers, you give them to your clinic, you put them in the folder. What is that person going to say to your medical team when the medical team says, oh my gosh, this is a bad day. Your friend, your loved one had a bad heart attack, but we got the heart started again. But they couldn't breathe by themselves, so now they're on a breathing machine. And then it looks like they've got an infection in their blood. And maybe their kidneys are shutting down. And I think, they just had a stroke. What do you want me to do for your loved one? It's kind of overwhelming. And so the challenge now that I think we're getting a lot of people to the legal nuts and bolts are already taken care of, the challenge is expressing what's in your own heart and mind and telling those people how to be your voice. Just because they're listed on the paper doesn't mean that they get to think, I think this is best for her. They have to say, this is what she always wanted. And this is the hard part. There's a sheet of handwritten papers someplace. Are they on the table? Oh, she's having conversation. I'll look on the table, but there's 3 references. The top 2 are very interesting information sources for these kinds of questions, and they both have to do with a conversation. One is a consider the conversation, and the other is a conversation project, where people have actually had grants to say, you know what, normal people, we don't know what's going to happen to our health. We don't know what technology is going to give us for treatment. Is chemo going to get better? Is radiation, surgery, are things like that going to get better going forward? And so they ask questions about, what does living mean to me? What's important to me going forward? Is it important for me to be the scientific lab rat? So give me every medication, every research study, every possible gadget that goes in my head, that goes in my hip, that goes in my heart. Let me just stay there. I want to teach people about bodies. If that's important to you, your agents need to know that, because then when the medical team comes and says, you know what, your loved one looks like they aren't going to make it through this, you will have that confidence to say, they don't necessarily want to live in rehab. They want to teach. So do whatever you have to do to use that body so that people can learn. On the other hand, a lot of people might say, I've had 68 good years of health. I've had 95 years of good health. I don't want any of that fancy stuff. I don't want technology. When the time comes, just let me be comfortable. I don't want dialysis. I don't want feeding tubes. Let me be comfortable. And so your agent then says, okay, I don't want that fancy stuff. The harder part, I think, is not do it all or do none, because I think most of us would say, yeah, we kind of have an idea of what's important to us. But we forget that there's so much preventive medicine, there's so much curative medicine, that gray zone before living and dying is getting bigger and longer. And so my classic first brain thought is somebody that's living with dementia, memory loss. Oftentimes, those individuals have a perfect body. I've got good heart, I don't have cancer, I've got good lungs, but the brain organ is dying quickly. And so what happens, those individuals will often forget to eat, they'll forget to drink, they'll forget to move. And so all of those put that person at risk of infections over and over, skin ulcers, dehydration, falls, broken hips. And the questions then aren't, are you going to start my heart? Because I've got the strong heart. It's, how many times do I go to the hospital for IV fluids? Do I want a feeding tube? Do I want antibiotics every other week for another bladder infection? And those, I think, are the harder questions, because when I'm 40-something, well, yeah, of course, I want fluid, I want antibiotics. When I'm 90, and I've been in the hospital 6 times for dehydration, bladder infections, falls, do you really want to take somebody who isn't aware of what's happening, bundle them on an ambulance cart, and go crazy people poking needles all over, doing tests, looking at me. I don't know what you're doing to me, but do I want to do it again for the 7th time in a month? Maybe. Maybe not. Those are the kinds of questions that the hope is you think through and say to your family, you know what? If I need antibiotics and I need IV fluids once, and I look wonderful at the end of it, and it's 3, 4, 6, 8 months down the road and I might need it again, yeah. What was happening during those 6 to 8 months? I was enjoying summer. Tomorrow we'll enjoy winter. I was enjoying families. That was a treatment that helped improve my quality of life. So do it. But if I got all this fancy treatment, I got tuned up, and 2 days later, your medical team is going, it's not working, back to the hospital, then maybe that's not working for me and it's not good enough to keep going. So those are the questions that are hard for me to ask families when I see these people in and out of the hospital, in and out of acute treatments. What is our goal? So some people say, how am I going to make sense out of this? I don't know when enough is enough. How many blood transfusions do I have to have? Are they getting better? How do I know if I get better? And I had a lady many years ago, way before I got my gray hair and got extra smart. When she was doing her conversation with her family, she said, it just makes me almost cry thinking about it. She said, you know what? I don't want to focus on the negative. Dying is part of my life. I'm going to do it well. I'm going to do it my way. And this is what I want you guys to think about. As my voices, as my agents, I want you to not say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But instead think about this. And in her handwriting, the old-fashioned way with pen and paper, she wrote a beautiful, beautiful story. And she said, this is what living means to me. And she was all warm and fuzzy and all that stuff that us Norwegians aren't. And she said, I want to wake up and I want that morning sunshine in my window. And I want to feel a snuggled blanket around me. And I want the hugs of my family. And I want my coffee. And I just want to feel loved and know that people are here for me. And at the end of it, in her last paragraph, and she did it so much better, and she just went into this beautiful description. At the end of it, she said, when the time comes and my medical team comes to you and says, I have a pill, I have a treatment, I have a test, I have whatever to fix whatever I'm living with at that time. I want you as my family and my voice to ask one question. Can you guarantee that your pill, your treatment, your test is going to give this quality of life to my mom? And if the doctor or whoever the surgeon says, I can't promise that, then I want you to be strong and say, no, thank you. This is not going to make mom's life better, and let me be comfortable. And so if you think about it, this lady took a lot of unknowns and a lot of potential fears and a lot of stresses, and she turned it around and said very simply, if you can't promise that that pill is going to let me see the sunshine and feel the hugs and smell the coffee, I don't want it. And don't feel badly about saying, no, thank you, I've had a good life. And so I think that's been a challenge for me to try and define what is that good life for me, and how can I share that with other people? Because it's doing exactly what she said. She said, I lived a great life, and I'm going to die a good death. I'm not going to do this negative stuff. And so it was a very interesting twist on a potentially scary challenge. The references that I had written out with the conversation stuff in the title, they are questions kind of triggering your mind about what is living, how important is that, what do I want it to look like, how do I have these conversations. Medicare, 2, 3, 4 years ago maybe, has given us as prescribers a code so that we can actually sit down with our patients in the clinic and talk about this stuff. And so it's usually Medicare does your 80%, your secondary does the 20%, and so there shouldn't be a payment back to you. But you can say, hey doc, this is what's cooking in the community, this is what I'm supposed to be thinking about. In my experience, as you've known me with my health concerns, what does my end of life look like? And if it's kidney failure, the path might look this way. If you're living with heart stuff and stroke stuff, your path might look this way. But your insurance will now cover that one-to-one conversation, or if it's doc and family conversation about what kinds of things do I have to be thinking about. I don't have memory loss, but I have this. And so that's a new insurance benefit that has not been used a lot. The other thing is that, what else should we talk about? The other thing is thinking if it's, okay, another paper to fill out, another thought to go through, turn it around and think about it from your family's perspective. And again, another family had taught me to look at it this way also. They said, you know what, yeah, we filled out the paperwork. They said, Tag, you're it when I can't. Sign on the dotted line. I understand this is my responsibility. But then somebody said, you know what, if you really think about it, that individual trusts me so much that I can be their voice. I can be that final open door to let that person's voice be heard. That's a pretty big responsibility. That is an amazing privilege and gift that that person has given me this challenge. And so I want to do everything I can to understand what's important to this person. And when that time comes, let's say it is that person with dementia and I forget to eat and I have to think about a feeding tube and I have to think about fluids. Think of what a great, resounding, boom, your answer can be. If you're put in that position, do we put in a feeding tube or don't we? If you don't have to go, oh gosh, oh gee, oh gosh, am I going to starve Dad? I don't want to starve Dad. I don't, oh, Dad's going to be, oh, I don't want to be the one to make the decision to kill Dad because I didn't feed him. I hear that a lot. But by having these conversations, by thinking about it, that person can say, Doc, it's a bad day, but Dad's talked to me, and I know that he would not want this treatment. Don't do it. Dad never wanted it. And it's not on the kid's shoulders. It's the kid making that final honorable decision because Dad can't. And then the kid can go on and survive with comfort and joy and confidence that that was Dad's voice. So, nobody's snoring yet. Nobody fell over sleeping yet. Did that help with other questions, other thoughts, other what should we be thinking about, what should we do? Did it just kind of go, oh, let's get to the good stuff. I got to find my documents. I don't know what to put in them.
Well said.
Okay. I get the easy part. So many times people ask me the hard questions, but I think out of this is the easy part. There's a question.
I have a question. How often, okay, if you do an advance directive at like 30, how often do you revisit it?
My hope is that you do it once a year, at minimum. A lot of the people that teach us primary care people what to do, they suggest that when you go in for your annual physical, that's a good time just to say, hey, let me look at my paperwork, make sure the people are still in my circle and they're able to do it, able and willing to do it. It's hoped that much of the medical field is now thinking this is as important as colonoscopy, medication refills, cholesterol check, power of attorney, let's look at it. But I can't say that we're there yet. The minimum is 1 year. The caveat is if there's something significant changing with your health or in your family, you're like, whoa, I never knew that could be part of me. We better rethink it.
And there should be copies of these on our medical record, correct?
Yep.
Rather than home in our drawer.
Yes. And I'm laughing because when my people finally say, okay, here's a document, we've had the conversation, I'm good. I say, go to your Kinko's, your FedEx copy thing and make 1 million copies, or 900,000, and keep a list of where you put them, because your medical record, yes, but in this great world of computers, bless them, Hudson Hospital may not talk to Albuquerque Hospital. And so if you travel, if you have a surgeon here, primary in this system, make sure that all of your health people have them, make sure your agents have them. But then I'm also encouraging my people to make a folded up copy, stick it in an envelope in your suitcases that you use all the time or your vehicles. Because everybody is so mobile anymore, It may not be a perfectly legal document in New Mexico, but at least it opens the door and gives some guidance to whoever is caring for you if something happens. And the reason you keep a list is because if you change your mind next year, you have to revoke and give new ones to the people that you've given old ones to. Otherwise, it's really confusing. Other thoughts or questions? Or can you guys teach me something so I can tell my other patients about, hey, this is really what worked for this family? Okay. Then maybe we all stand up and shake and wiggle before Jennifer. All right. Guys aren't wiggly.
So this is all very exciting. How many women have pockets in their dresses? Hardly any. So I'm Jennifer O'Neill. I'm an elder law attorney. And I'm going to talk for about 2 hours. I know Dr. Severson said 15 minutes. I'm just going to be honest. We're going to get pizza at about 10 o'clock. Have a little nap, and we'll start again at midnight. No, I'll try to go for about 30 minutes. And then if it's going to go longer because of the questions you asked, I will warn you ahead of time. So we're going to talk about estate planning issues, if that's okay with everybody. My materials are over there with the lavender cover, and I handed them out, and some of you have some with the darker purple cover. Those, they're from 2021. So the numbers in the back regarding long-term care planning, medical assistance are a little bit out of date, but the estate planning stuff is all the same because there haven't been any significant changes. But first, before we talk about more estate planning, there was a question about durable powers of attorney. Where did that come from? And so the question was really, what does the word durable mean? Was that your kind of what you were wondering?
Well, yeah, because what we currently have is power of attorney, not durable power of attorney.
And so if it does not say durable power of attorney on the title, that's okay. It does not mean it is not durable. So when you see the word durable on a power of attorney, and a power of attorney is a document that shares your legal authority with somebody else. There's a little bit of information in those lavender handouts about powers of attorney. And there's two kinds. The first that Dr. Severson was talking about are powers of attorney for healthcare, sharing your legal authority regarding your healthcare decisions. And the other is power of attorney for property and finance, sharing your legal authority regarding all of your personal business. Durable means that the document, the power of attorney, will continue in effect if you become incompetent or incapacitated. Because what a lot of people don't realize is powers of attorney for finance, those can go into effect as soon as you sign them. They're wonderful for convenience purposes. You know, it's hot and sticky out here now, but think about the middle of winter. You can name your spouse or somebody close to you as your agent, and then you never have to leave the house all winter long. You just let your agent do all of the work until the weather gets nice. So they can be used for convenience as well as if you ever become incompetent or incapacitated. And so that's what durable means. And powers of attorney, by definition, always end when the principal, the person who signed the document, dies. Because you're sharing legal authority. When your legal authority ends, when you die, the legal authority that you shared with your agent also ends. So that's just a teeny weeny bit about powers of attorney. And if we want to talk about powers of attorney for half an hour, that's fine with me. I love this stuff. I do this all the time. But did that kind of make sense? That's what the word durable means. So in your document, look for language that says that this document will continue in effect if I become incapacitated or incompetent. Or there's something called a springing power of attorney that doesn't go into effect until you become incapacitated or incompetent. By definition, those can't be durable because they don't go into effect until after.
So the power of attorney does stay in effect if you become incapacitated.
Yep, if it's durable, and you really have to bend over backwards to not have durable power of attorney. All of the traditional forms, all the statutory forms out there are durable. Isn't this fun? So we're talking about tonight, guys, money, families, and death. The basis of all great drama. Okay? One thing that usually Mike gets up here and introduces me, and then he steals my line, that Dr. Severson, she's getting a little more assertive in her language, but I always remind people, mortality is 100%. We are all gonna die. So when you're thinking, if I die, no, I guarantee you are gonna die. I don't know when, and I don't know how, and yes, I'm a little bit irreverent about all of it. Makes it easier to talk about and easier to listen to, right? And so when somebody dies, realize that they have spent their whole lives accumulating stuff, accumulating belongings, money, real estate, cars, investments, and when you die, you leave all of those assets behind. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about your estate, and we're going to talk about estate planning, because everything you've accumulated during your life is what we call your estate. Even the clothes on your back are part of your estate. So the planning part is for you to decide where you want your estate to go when you die, and how do you want those assets to get to that destination. That's estate planning. And because everybody is going to die, and pretty much everybody has at least a few things, a few belongings when they die, estate planning is something that we all have to deal with. Everybody with me so far? Okay. We're going to talk about administration. And I wiggle 5 fingers because administration essentially has 5 steps. And we go through administration every time somebody dies. So the first step is to identify the heirs and beneficiaries. Where does the deceased individual want their estate to go? The next step, identify the estate. What did that person own? Did they own real estate, houses, vacation property, cabin? Did they have a bank account? How much stuff did they have back in the back corners of their closets? All of that kind of stuff. Yep, too much. Third step, identify any debt. You know, some people might have a mortgage. Some people might just have a final phone bill. Everybody's different. Fourth step, we take the assets and pay the debts. And then the last step of administration is we take what's left and we distribute it back to the heirs and beneficiaries. That's administration, and we do that one way or another every time somebody dies. And it doesn't always look that tidy, but those are the basic tasks that we're accomplishing after somebody dies. Now, has anybody ever heard of probate? Yes. Yep, and has anybody ever had a good experience with probate? Probate gets a bad reputation. Yep, it does. Probate is simply court-supervised administration. That's what it is. Most people don't quite understand what it's for. They just hear all of the negative comments, kind of that underlying groan you all made when I said probate. Probate has been around for at least probably 170 years. And it's because we need that nice, structured, tidy process, or needed it historically, to administer estates as people died. You know, I think Wisconsin is about 175 years old. People were still dying 175 years ago. And so probate was the process that we used to move assets along to the next owner and make sure that creditors were paid. Now, because the system has been around for so long, and notice I said court supervised, doesn't mean you have to go see the judge anymore. It doesn't mean that it's extra scary at all. What it means is that the person in charge, and in Wisconsin, that person is called the personal representative, not the executor. We call it personal representative or personal rep or PR in Wisconsin. That personal representative has to file paperwork with the court to provide all the appropriate information, make sure that all of the tasks of administration are complete, and that everybody who's entitled to the information receives the information. And so probate has served us very well for a very long time, and because it works so well, over the years, the state has added extra steps. So now in the state of Wisconsin, it takes about a year to get through probate. You file most of the documents electronically, or if you're not working with a lawyer, you can mail them or you can walk them over to the courthouse. And so it's a nice, orderly process. But remember I said it's very structured? The interesting thing is when you think about how we hold our assets, the way that we hold our assets today has changed dramatically from even 40, 50 years ago. 40, 50 years ago, we didn't have IRAs. They hadn't been created yet. We didn't have POD, payable on death designations, or TOD, transfer on death designations. We couldn't put transfer on death designations on real estate in Wisconsin until 2005. And so historically, we used a lot more probate because that was really one of our better options. And in the last 40 years, we have moved away from probate and created all of these other options to administer an estate more quickly, more cost effectively, faster, easier, less frightening, all those good things. So administration, we need it one way or another every time somebody dies. Sometimes that administration is probate, sometimes it's not. Everybody with me so far? Kind of, sort of? Okay, now let's talk about 4 estate planning options. So the first option is to do nothing. Doesn't that sound a little surprising? Did you think you were going to hear that come out of my mouth? No. Everybody has at least one estate plan, courtesy of the laws of the state of Wisconsin. And that set of laws is called the Rules of Intestate Succession. Intestate means without a will. Remember I was talking about historically we had probate and we needed all of that process to get work done? Well, again, think of 150 years ago. We still had people with estates, but we didn't have Google. We couldn't say, Google, how do I write a will? We couldn't go to Office Max and buy a will kit. And we certainly didn't have lawyers on every corner like we do today. So most people died without a will. And remember, we didn't have beneficiary designations back then. And again, the state of Wisconsin, we needed some structure to move estates along. So they created the Rules of Intestate Succession to direct assets when somebody died without a will so that it could go through administration. So in Wisconsin, the Rules of Intestate Succession direct your assets very much like most families would direct their own assets in an estate plan. In Wisconsin, your primary heir is your spouse. Now, if you have children outside of that marriage, there's a little deviation, but generally primary heir is your spouse. If you have no spouse because spouse is predeceased or you're divorced or never married, then it's your children equally. If any of your children have predeceased you, that child's share goes to your grandchildren and down until we run out of people. If you have no spouse, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, it goes back up to your parents. If either of them are alive, so if both of them are alive, they split it. But if one of them is predeceased, that single parent inherits everything. If your parents are deceased, it goes to your siblings. If any of your siblings are predeceased, it goes to their children, your nieces and nephews. And so it goes out like that for 3 generations. So a lot of people think that if they don't have a will, their assets, their estate, goes to the state of Wisconsin. That's not true. If you die without a will or beneficiaries or other estate planning in place, the rules of intestate succession pick up, and it will go to those family members, which is where most people want their assets to go anyway. So we have at least one pretty good estate plan already in place for each and every single one of us. Now, if we have this nice free estate plan, why would we ever spend any money on individual estate planning? 1, intestate succession requires the use of probate. You've got a set of laws that are being applied to a bundle of assets. That's going to require the structure of probate. Not everybody wants their estate to go through probate. They want it to be easier for their survivors. Sometimes we want assets to go to other recipients other than what's in the rules of intestate succession. So maybe we don't want it to go equally to our kids. Believe it or not, there are some families out there who disinherit their kids. And it's not always for bad reasons. Sometimes it's because those kids have been very successful and they say, I don't want anything from you, I want it to go to my siblings. So families are amazing. They're amazing. Every single one is different. So you might not want the distribution like in intestate succession. You might want something to go to charities or churches. Well, if you want to deviate from intestate succession, a lot of people automatically presume that what they really need is a will. Now, wills are wonderful estate planning tools. The purpose of a will is to do essentially 2 things. A will identifies the heirs and beneficiaries, and then a will also nominates that personal representative who would be appointed by the court to do all the administrative work of probate. But wills also require probate to be put into effect. And so if you're okay with your estate going through probate, and all you really want to do is just have more control over your heirs and beneficiaries, a will is a wonderful tool. Somewhere out there, and we can't figure out how it started, there's a misunderstanding that if you have a will, your estate avoids probate. Anybody heard that before? I hear it in my office quite often. It's just the opposite. Wills actually require probate to be put into effect. So if one of your goals is to avoid the probate process for whatever reason, you don't want a will, because wills need probate. Do you have a question?
No, I just asked him a question.
Oh, that's okay. You can do that. So if we're okay with probate, one option is to do nothing and let the rules of intestate succession control. Or if you want to have more control over your heirs and beneficiaries, you can do a will. Both of those are going to require probate. Those are our 2 probate estate planning options. Now, what if one of the goals is to avoid probate? Why would you want to avoid probate? Maybe you don't need all of that structure. Maybe you want to save some of the expenses related with probate. Maybe you want more privacy, because remember I said probate makes sure that everybody who needs the information has access to it. One of the kind of the hallmarks of probate is that it's public record. So if you were curious about anybody you know who died, you could look at some of their probate records online, or you could go over to the courthouse and look at their file. That's why, the rock star Prince, he died in Minneapolis a few years ago. Every once in a while, we still hear about Prince's estate. It's because Prince didn't have a will. His estate is in probate. So any of the reporters can go over there and get information. So he's our latest poster child for estate planning. So there are lots of reasons that people want to avoid probate. Sometimes it's just misunderstanding about what the process is. But if the goal is to avoid probate, we have to eliminate what we call probate assets, because probate only controls probate assets. Probate assets are in your own name on the date of your death, so Jennifer O'Neill, with no joint owner and no named beneficiary. So think about your assets. I live in River Falls with my husband. Our house is owned, husband and wife, is survivorship marital property. Survivorship means that when the first of us dies, then that spouse's interest just goes poof, and the surviving spouse owns the whole house. It doesn't need probate because it has a joint owner, or I have life insurance. I own the life insurance in my own name, but my husband is the beneficiary. When I die, presuming he's still alive, he will receive those insurance benefits. Not because of probate, not because he's the joint owner, but because he's the named beneficiary. So there are elements of ownership and just kind of documentation on some assets that overrides probate no matter what. Okay, so if one of the goals is to avoid probate, consider adding beneficiary designations to your assets. They work beautifully. We can put beneficiary designations on real estate in Wisconsin, bank accounts, investments, retirement accounts, most business interests. What else? Life insurance. There's really 3 classes of assets that we cannot add a beneficiary designation to in the state of Wisconsin. The first one is animals, livestock. Why? Because if you have a herd of cows or a horse or 10 horses, there's no documentation that allows you to say, when I die, my horse goes to this person. There's no legal tool to do it. The other kind, farm equipment. You could have a $500,000 combine, and when you die, there's no way to add a beneficiary designation to it because that's not how we document ownership of those kinds of assets. Now, most of us probably don't have livestock and farm equipment. We might have a really good lawnmower, but that's about it. But the very, very common asset that we cannot add beneficiaries to in Wisconsin, cars. Most of us own cars. And when we die, we cannot, well, when we're alive, we can't add a beneficiary to direct that car when we die. I expect that to be coming. We've had that available in Minnesota for about 3-4 years. Wisconsin just hasn't taken the steps to introduce that yet. But otherwise, we can add beneficiary designations to almost anything. And the way that beneficiary designations work, the owner dies, and just like Queen Elizabeth died and Charles became king, like boom, that's how beneficiary designations work. The owner dies, the beneficiary owns the asset. It's like a little bell rings in heaven. But then there's paperwork you have to do. You have to file paperwork to document the change of ownership. We cannot get away from paperwork in this country yet. So beneficiary designations work great. Question?
I got a favorite granddaughter.
Yep.
I can't do any paperwork to say that she gets my car if I die.
Not officially on a title. You could do a will. You could put it on a list. You could add her as a joint owner, but not yet with a beneficiary designation in Wisconsin.
So she would be on the car title, then it would be hers.
Yep.
Does it have to be and, or can it be an or?
I would recommend an or.
Okay.
Now, you have to be careful with that because if she gets in a lot of accidents, or if she gets divorced, or, so adding joint owners is risky business. That's why I kind of point out the fact that it's a little bit difficult that we can't use beneficiaries on cars yet. So if we have any legislators in here, anybody, this is a perfect time to say, I will give you a donation if you introduce this legislation, because it would help everybody. So, beneficiary designations, if they're so wonderful, and they are wonderful, when should we not use beneficiary designations? Well, if we can't do it on cars yet. Basically, it doesn't really depend on the asset, and it doesn't depend on you. It depends on the beneficiary. 3 kinds of beneficiaries that we have to be careful about. 1, minor beneficiaries. Anybody under the age of 18 in Wisconsin. Why? Because if they're under the age of 18, they are not legally competent to own and control assets. So, think about your favorite granddaughter. If she's 17 and she gets your car when you die, legally she can't own that by herself. She can't sell it by herself. She can't insure it by herself. And so minors, you have to be really careful. And if it's a bigger asset, like a $20,000 life insurance policy, you might think, oh, I'm going to give it to my grandchild, and they're going to save it and use it for college. Well, if it's a life insurance company, that life insurance company might not even pay out that money until that minor is older, 18, or unless somebody goes to court and is appointed their legal guardian of their estate. And so what was going to be this nice, quick, easy transfer has now created a bit of a headache for the parents, usually, of this minor grandchild. So how do we work around that? There is an option. It's called the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, UTMA, UTMA. Wisconsin and Minnesota both have a law that allows you to designate a minor as a beneficiary, but instead of it going to, let's say I was 10, instead of going to my 10-year-old granddaughter, Jennifer O'Neill, you would name a custodian. Jennifer's mother is custodian. So Sandra Thompson is custodian for Jennifer O'Neill under Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. And what that does is it empowers that custodian to take that asset and manage that asset on behalf of the minor until they reach age 21. And so if it's an asset that you're comfortable with that person, that minor receiving when they turn 21, consider just putting a UTMA designation on it. It works great. So minor beneficiaries, be careful of. Second, disabled beneficiaries. Now, you might not know that a family member of yours has been determined to be disabled because some disabilities are not visible disabilities. So you need to have maybe a delicate conversation. And the reason I say be careful of individuals who have been determined to be disabled, and when I say determined to be disabled, determined by the Social Security Administration to be disabled. And the reason I say that is if you've been determined to be disabled by Social Security, you may very well be receiving or about to receive government benefits. And a lot of those government benefits are what we call means tested, which means they're available to people only with very, very modest assets or very, very limited income. So you may have an adult child or adult grandchild, let's say, and you want to give them $10,000 because they're disabled and they live in subsidized housing and they can't afford a car, and you think this would be a wonderful gift for them. So you name them as the beneficiary of a $10,000 life insurance policy, and then you die peacefully in your bed wearing cute pajamas, integral part of my death plan. And then that disabled person receives $10,000, but they're getting supplemental security income, SSI, and they are allowed to have only $2,000 of assets. Suddenly you've given them 10. They've got to figure out how to spend $10,000 by the end of the month, or they have to do something with it, or they lose their benefits. I have seen that happen more times than I care to express, and it is heartbreaking and frustrating because there are so many better options, and really, really scary to those disabled beneficiaries. So how do you leave assets to a disabled beneficiary? One, there are specific kinds of trusts, supplemental needs trusts, that you can create to leave assets for the benefit of an individual who's disabled and getting government benefits. There are also, if that person was disabled, determined to be disabled before the age of 26, there's something called an ABLE account that you may be able to funnel assets into. You can put up to $16,000 per year into an ABLE account, up to a max of $100. So there are options. So be careful with disabled beneficiaries. Third kind of beneficiaries, fighting beneficiaries. Kids are fighting beneficiaries. Kids are really, really good at fighting. We've mastered it. And so with bank accounts, it can work out fine. The interesting thing about bank accounts is every bank has a different policy. If you have, two kids and they do not like each other, you might name them beneficiary on one set of bank accounts, and one files their claim form and the bank sends them a check, and the other one, just to be, contrary, waits 6 months. That might work out. The efficient kid might get their money and the other one can just stew for a while. Or you might have a bank that requires that they wait until all those beneficiary claim forms are submitted. You might be waiting 6 months before your, obstinate brother files his claim form. So be careful with fighting families, especially if we're talking about real estate. Bank accounts, one $20 bill is pretty much the same as another $20 bill. But when you have to own real estate together and make that work going into the future, or if you have to sell real estate together, you require at least a modicum of cooperation. And if you don't think your beneficiaries can cooperate to perform those tasks, do not name them as beneficiaries. Again, you might have made that transfer of ownership really efficiently just to set them up for litigation later. They will not appreciate that gift from you. So beneficiary designations are wonderful in the right situation, okay? But beneficiary designations avoid probate. What is, if we don't want probate, but we don't want to use beneficiary designations, we have one more estate planning option, and I brought it with me. And it owns a microphone. Usually I forget to bring this. We're going to talk about trusts, and we're going to talk about trusts for 5 minutes, and then we're going to be done, okay? If you want structure like probate, and you want one person in charge, like the personal representative in probate, but you don't want probate for some reason, another great option is a trust. And the reason I am holding a basket is because there are lots of different trusts out there. We use different trusts for different reasons, but at their most basic, every single trust is exactly the same. So I always say, when you're thinking about a trust, picture a basket with a handle. And the reason is that every single trust out there is just a container to hold and control assets. Now, trusts, we create them in writing, and a document generally called a trust agreement, an agreement. It's a private agreement, not secret, but private. When I say private, we don't have to have it approved by a governmental entity. We don't have to have it approved by a company. In this region, with my clients, trusts are very, very often between family members. And when I say between, there are at least three different parties in every single trust. Each of those parties has a slightly different job. And this is in the purple handout too, guys. So think about an agreement. An agreement is a document signed by multiple parties. The first party in every single trust is the grantor. We call them the grantor in our office. Other lawyers call them settlors, trust makers, donors. There's different vocabulary for the same role. The job of the grantor is to decide what do they want to accomplish with the trust. There is no one single trust that can do everything. Trusts, there are different kinds of trusts that can do just about everything except fix you a sandwich. But there is not one trust that can do it all, so we have to prioritize. What are we trying to do? And it's the grantor and their priorities and goals that determine the kind of trust that we use and the provisions that we put into the trust. So the grantor creates the basket. And it's the grantor's assets that go into the basket. I didn't put any assets in here. Once you become the grantor, you're the grantor forever. Grantors do not change. Other people might put money or assets in your trust, but you're still the grantor. Grantors are even considered to be grantors after they die. Okay? Second party in every single trust is the trustee. The trustee's job is to hold the handle to the basket. They own and control the assets in the trust. Now, trustees have a lot of authority. It's a very important job, but the trustees can't do anything they want. They can only do what the grantor authorized and directed them to do in the trust agreement. So the grantor has control over the actions of the trustee going forward. Now remember I said grantors don't change? Trustees do change. Sometimes, if we're using the trust for estate planning, the grantors are actually the initial trustees. But what did I say about people? Mortality is 100%, right? Once you die, it's really hard to sign paperwork. You make a rotten trustee. So trustees can quit, they can resign. If they resign, we need a new trustee called a successor trustee. If the trustee becomes incapacitated, so cognitively they can't do the work, we need a new trustee. If the trustee is doing a horrible job, not everybody is cut out to serve as trustee. We need to remove them, get a new trustee, and then when the trustee dies, we need a new trustee. So trustees are expected to change over time, and part of the grantor's bundle of decisions is who is going to be the successor trustee and then who after that. So trustees are really important. The third party in every single trust is the beneficiary. The beneficiary is the person or the people who get the goodies out of the basket. So the grantor may be the beneficiary, but once they die, they shouldn't need anything else, unless there's like perpetual care for the gravesite or something. So then beneficiaries generally change over time. And so by putting all those pieces together, that's how we craft trusts to accomplish our estate planning goal. And so think about that, 10-year-old grandchild and you want to leave them money for college. You could have a trust and you put $20,000 or $50,000 or however much it costs into the basket. The trustee has authority to pay tuition and fees and books, whether that grandchild is 17 or whether they're 27. So that's one way to manage distributions for minors. You can have a different kind of trust where the beneficiary is disabled. Now, they can't own the trust. They can't even be the trustee, but the trustee can hold assets for the benefit of a disabled individual. And instead of giving money to that disabled individual, we're going to buy a car. Or maybe they have a car, but they need new tires. Or maybe we're going to buy a house and they can rent it from the trust. Or maybe they just need a new TV or some new shoes. The trustee can pay for all of that. So we can manage distributions to disabled beneficiaries with the trust. If we have a fighting family, it only takes 2 to fight. But sometimes we have large families, 7 family members. You can put things in a trust and you can have that structure within the provisions of the trust that you can have that one trustee who's making all the decisions. We're going to sell this house, we're going to list it with that realtor, we're going to ask for that price, and we're going to accept that offer, and then I'm going to pay all the bills, and then here, fighting siblings, here's your money. You're welcome. So trusts are wonderful, wonderful tools. They can be overkill, but in the right situations, they might be the best tool that we've got. And 1 second, I'm going to wrap this up and then you can ask your question. Remember probate assets? Assets have to be in your own name on the date of your death. If the assets are in the trust, they aren't in your own name. They're in the name of the trust. The trust has a trustee with authority to do all the work, and they have identified beneficiaries, so trusts avoid probate. So our 2 probate options are intestate and wills, non-probate, beneficiaries, and trusts. Isn't that fun? Yeah. Question?
If you answer it,
Okay.
that is, the trusts have to have the assets named in the trust name.
They have to have assets that are owned by the trust either during your life or easily upon your death. We might actually do beneficiaries where the beneficiary is the trust to get them easily into the basket after you die.
And do not trusts eliminate probate?
Yes. Yep, they do. Question?
So cars you can name beneficiaries for, but can the car be an asset that goes into the estate for the trustee to
Yep.
decide to either sell or give up?
Yep, yeah. I'm one of, there's really a difference of opinion on that. I tell clients when they buy their next car, put it in the name of the trust so that the trust owns it. I don't recommend that you go change the ownership of your existing car unless it's a really nice car, because I think it's gotten too expensive. But yeah, some lawyers think that if you're in an accident and the injured party sees that the car is owned by a trust, they automatically think there's lots of money there. The reality is that if you're in an accident, you're going to get sued, your trust is going to get sued. They sue everybody, so it doesn't matter. So I like putting boats in trust, trailers and, big, fancy campers in trust, nice cars. Some people have collector cars that are worth a lot of money. That would have to go through probate. I don't want you to set up, do all the work of creating a trust and then we're probating a car. So yes, that's my opinion. One last question, yeah. Okay, 2 last questions.
If you have a trust and you want to make a change to it, do you have to rewrite the whole trust, or how do you make it legal?
So the classic answer, so the question was, if you have a trust and you want to make a change, how do you do it? Classic legal answer is it depends. Part of it depends on whether if you're the grantor, if you actually reserve the right to make changes. That would make it a revocable trust, able to be revoked or amended. So then the grantor can make that change. unilaterally. Sometimes we create what are called irrevocable trusts, cannot be changed. If it is an irrevocable trust, the definition is the grantor has not reserved the authority to make the change. You can make a change if all of the parties to the trust agree, because it's a private agreement. If everybody agrees that we're going to make a change, we can make a change, but it always needs to be done in writing. And I always recommend that you work with an attorney so that you don't change something unintentionally and create more problems. That's one of the downsides about trusts, is they aren't really a do-it-yourself kind of tool. They're more sophisticated, and you really need to honor that sophistication and formality. Sorry. There are lots of things you can do without lawyers. I wouldn't recommend that. Then there was one more question back there.
So if you die without a will,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And you survive your spouse, and then it says, you say, it's also children from any previous relations.
Right.
If I have stepkids from the previous relation, do they count, or just biological?
Biological or legally adopted. So everybody hear the question? The question is, children from a previous relationship or a different relationship other than the marriage, does that include stepchildren? No. Stepchildren, by legal definition, are the children of a spouse. They are not legally your heirs unless they are born to you or adopted by you, and born to you and not adopted by somebody else. So, yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there, I'm going to stick around for a while, so if you have questions later. Otherwise, I went only 15 minutes past my promised 30 minutes. Lawyers, we don't know when to be quiet. So thank you, everybody, and now Cassandra's going to come up and talk about funerals.
So what I usually touch on is how families can kind of prepare for what Jennifer reminded us is the inevitable. Unfortunately, everybody here will die. We just don't know when or how. And with that being said, a lot of people want to take care to try to preserve some assets so that you or your survivors could utilize those assets and benefit from them instead of allowing the state to drain all of your funds for the benefit of other people whom you never know or wanted to meet. And so with that being said, one of the most important things that everybody should do is talk to your families about what your intentions are. Because as Jennifer said, people are going to fight, and people that get along now somehow find things to fight about when a loved one passes away. And all those emotions are high. People are getting together and they're talking about, what are we going to do with mom or dad's house? What are we going to do with all the things that they owned? And why should you get that when I shouldn't get this? And I did so much more for mom than you did while you were living out there enjoying yourself in Las Vegas, or whatever it is. But with that being said, have those conversations so that it's clear what your intentions and your desires are. And if you don't do any more than go and sit down with a funeral provider and pick out all the things that you think that you want to create the type of a celebration you're envisioning, then that would be helpful in and of itself. If you don't go any further with funding or anything like that. Because at least there'd be something in paper that you signed and your funeral provider signed that your family could say, oh, I guess that is what mom wanted. She wrote it down there and signed to it, right? So it's kind of hard to fight with it when it's written down. So that's going to help a lot, just in and of itself. Now, if you want to take the extra step and you want to preserve some of your assets, I don't know about you, but I work hard for the money that I get paid from my job. And when I do, I don't want it going somewhere that the state decides. I'd rather dictate where that money ends up if I die and I can't enjoy it myself, right? So in light of those kinds of feelings, most people want to preserve their assets, and one of the things the state does allow you to do is to set aside some of your own dollars to take care of all of the goods and the services that would be associated with what we today call a life celebration. People always call them funerals. but more and more people want to make it a happy event as opposed to a somber one. And so we call them celebrations of life. And with that being said, the state says, yeah, we'll let you take some of your money and put it aside. We'll even protect it so that nobody can take it away and use it for anything else other than the things you pick out and you create a list of and contract to have provided upon your death. They call that a burial contract, by the way, because you're going to pick out things that you would want associated with your burial. The funeral provider who offers them and the other service providers and vendors that provide those things would also provide through the funeral home. And then they sign and promise to see that those are provided upon your death, and you sign and say, yep, those are the things that we talked about and I want those. So you have a burial contract. Then if you decide to fund it, you've got a couple of options. You could either go with, the old way was the bank trust. They're kind of there are something out there that people know about. Some limitations with bank trust funding are the state says, well, if you want to plan ahead and fund ahead, you can't pre-fund for certain items. They call them cash advance items. What kinds of things are cash advances? Well, things that you typically associate with a funeral, but they're not provided by the funeral home themselves. They're things provided by outside vendors, like your newspaper provides the obituary. That's a cash advance item. The florist provides flowers. There might be a venue where people eat, and so there would be a luncheon. Those are types of things that typically you'll see them on your funeral bill. The family would see one consolidated bill with all of those types of items on it so that it's easier for the family to just facilitate payment with just one check. But the funeral home essentially has advanced the payment on behalf of the family for those things. So hence cash advance items, that's where that comes from. So the state says, okay, if you want to pre-fund and you want us to protect this asset and keep anybody else from getting it to spend for something else, then you can't pre-fund with a bank those cash advance items. The other thing the state says, if you're going to fund with a bank trust, you want to pick out services for your funeral, sure, that's fine for yours and your spouse's, but you can limit that to $4,500. Anything beyond that you think you want for service, you can't pre-fund it in a bank trust. So people thought, well, I'm kind of restricted there. What's my other option? Well, they said, well, you could use an insurance policy instead to fund it. If you want to use an insurance policy, they lift all those restrictions. You can pre-fund your cash advance items if you're funding with an insurance policy. You can go ahead and select items that add to more than $4,500 if you're going to fund with insurance. So the state allows that. Why they don't restrict it the same as they do a bank trust, I don't know. Do we still know, Jennifer?
No, we have no idea.
We still have no idea. But that's the rule according to the state. So the state says, here's what. If you want to use the insurance policy, you need to follow our protocol, and then we'll give you that protection. You need to set it up as what they call a life insurance funded burial contract. So it's on this Medicaid eligibility handbook excerpt that you guys have in your folders. And it says, a life insurance funded burial contract, or abbreviated LIFBC, allows you to get an insurance policy to fund those items. And if you do it by their rules, the very bottom line tells you that that irrevocably assigned LIFBC is an unavailable asset because the member no longer owns it. And the way that you don't own it is what makes the state exempt it if you have to apply for benefits that are means tested, like Jennifer talked about, sometime in the future. And so how do you make it so that they don't view it as an asset? 2 contracts. We already said the first contract is your burial contract, that list of goods and services you pick out, and the funeral home signs and promises to provide them upon your death. Second contract then becomes the insurance policy that they're talking about that you want to use to fund it. That insurance policy is a contract because the insurance company makes a promise to pay that death benefit upon your death. So that's a contract. Now you have to, by the state rules, tie them together. And the mechanism you use to tie them together is an irrevocable assignment form, hence the name, irrevocably assigned LIFBC. That's got to be irrevocable. So the irrevocable assignment has 2 jobs. The first one is while you're alive. The second one is when you die. So its job while you're still here is to protect the values that you put into that life policy and the ownership rights to them in a trust where it's safe and protected and can't be gotten out of until you die. That's its job while you're alive. Put them in the trust, keep them safe. Its job when you die is to dictate that those funds can't go anyplace else until they've paid for the items on your burial contract. So essentially what you've done is you have bought those items on that burial contract with the policy whose benefits will pay for those items when you die. So you've tied them together with the irrevocable assignment. Now the state recognizes that you've separated yourself from that asset. So if I needed to go and apply for medical assistance, I could go tomorrow and qualify. There wouldn't be any problem with that look-back period where they look at what I owned then and compare to what I own now and see whether I've divested anything, dirty word divestment. So now they can see I've separated myself from the asset because I've followed the protocol, I've irrevocably assigned it, the state is comfortable that I can't turn that back into cash that I have on hand that would be an asset that disqualifies me for my benefits. So with that being said, I have now created a life insurance funded burial contract. If I still needed to go back and spend more money in order to get down to the asset limit the state allows me to keep and still qualify for benefits, I can put money in something else and have the state's blessing. And that would be on the other side of the excerpt that talks about what they say spaces. In that section, it tells you that you can fund not a full funeral like you can for yourself and your spouse, but burial space items for family members that the state considers eligible. So what family members would be eligible for me to buy burial space items for? Just think of family members who are one level up, down, or sideways from you, just one level. So parents and kids, and then siblings. And when we talk about parents and children, they do include step and adoptive parents and kids in this rule. And then also spouses of all of those individuals are likewise eligible. So if I had 4 kids and each of them had a spouse, and if I had money that I needed to spend to qualify for benefits, I could buy burial space items for each of my 4 kids and each of their spouses. And the state would say that's fine, and it fits within our parameters because there's another little program we have in Wisconsin that if I died indigent and my family exhausted all their means to try to pay my funeral bill and there were still unmet expenses, there's a fund abbreviated WIFCAP, and it stands for Wisconsin Funeral and Cemetery Aids Program. There's a little bit of a reimbursement that people can apply for to help them pay off the rest of the bill. It's a lot of times it's really not quite enough because it's $1,000 on one side, $1,500 on the other, funeral home and cemetery. But with that being said, they recognize if I'm going to fund those items for my kids or family members now, then potentially they'll have one fewer application for some of those reimbursement funds. God forbid one of those people were to die indigent later. So they say, yeah, if you've got the money now, spend it, and then we won't have to pay it out if they apply for a help from us later. So that's allowable. So that's your burial space item exclusion, they call it. And if you want to know what items are eligible to purchase, they're listed here. But just think of anything that goes in and around the gravesite, including the plot itself. So you've got the plot, or if they're choosing mausoleum, then the mausoleum space, and then the casket and the outer burial container that we usually call a vault, the monument, and the opening and closing fees that the cemetery or the mausoleum will charge to open that space to receive the remains or the cremated remains. So those are all items I can actually purchase, and again, fund them with an insurance policy for those eligible family members listed here. So when somebody has a situation where, and I see it happen a lot of times, where maybe there's a couple and they'd both been residing in their home, and then one of the couple goes to a facility and the other member who still was residing in the home passes away. Well, now they know that the person who's in the facility will not get well enough to go home, and they don't need the home that's out in the community anymore, so they sell it. And so the proceeds, because there's one spouse still alive in the facility, would go to the spouse who's in the facility, who's probably receiving Medicaid to help pay for the care in that facility. could kick that person off of benefits. So they've got to spend that money. Well, here's a scenario where the burial space exclusion could work out really well, because that person could set aside full funeral goods and services for themselves, but then fund burial space items for other family members as the state allows. And then that would take care of seeing that some of that money gets to go to benefit people that they want it to go to, instead of letting the state take it to pay for their care, or, use it to benefit other people that they, like I said, don't know. So those are good scenarios. People a lot of times are worried about what happens if I pre-plan, though, here, and then I wind up dying someplace else. Two things. If you were only traveling, but your residence was still here, then you definitely want to call the funeral home who has your pre-arrangement here, because they'll coordinate with the funeral home in the place where you would die. And that way you avoid some duplication of charges. I mean, there's always charges associated when a funeral home has to go to pick someone up from their place of death, and then to bring them, and maybe if you're going to come home to be buried here, then there'll be some preparation of the body to make sure that it can transport on public transportation. And so with that being said, those are some fees that can be coordinated through the funeral home where your pre-arrangement is, to help you avoid duplication and additional fees. So with that being said, number one, if you're traveling and die someplace else, have the family apprised of the fact that you have a pre-arrangement, and contact the local provider first. The next thing is, if you did decide, or someone else decided for you, that you were going to live someplace else. And I kind of give the example and illustrate it with, I have a stepson in Georgia. So let's say that because only the good die young, and I'm neither good nor young, I live a really long time, but I'm not well enough to look after myself. And so my stepson says, well, fine, we'll coordinate your care, but it's not going to be in a facility in Wisconsin. That's too far away. We're going to put you in a place in Savannah where we are. So I go down there, and, I outlive all my friends and relatives here, and by the time that I pass, they decide, well, why am I taking her back to Wisconsin? There's nobody there to look after her grave, so we'll put her in the ground over here. Well, fine. If my pre-arrangement was here, that's not a problem, because the state, in their infinite wisdom, when they made the rules, they provided for what we call portability. And so portability just says what it sounds like. It's portable, it goes with me. So if I go to Georgia and they decide that we're going to use funeral services and provider and bury me in Georgia, the insurance company has to abide by the law that says, hey, her benefits are portable. When that funeral provider provides those goods and services, then the insurance company must pay that provider with the death benefit proceeds. And if it takes all of those proceeds to pay for the items on the burial contract, then all of those proceeds pay to that funeral provider, wherever it is. If there is money left over, the state rule still applies that says the insurance company can only pay that provider for the total of the amount of goods and services that are on their bill. If there are excess proceeds, the law says it has to pay to my beneficiary or to my estate if no beneficiary is named or alive. So the rules are still the same for the insurance company. The money from the benefits distributes the same way. The only differences that you have are two. The cost structure in Georgia at that provider might be different from the cost structure here. If they're cheaper, there'll be more excess. If they're more expensive, there could be a balance. So that's one consideration. The other consideration is the estate recovery program. If I were in Georgia and had been receiving some Medicaid or other benefits down there, and then I die, and there happens to be excess, the insurance company, remember, has to pay my beneficiary, but it'll be subject to the estate recovery rules in that state instead of here, because that's where I lived when I died. Legal residence, right? So those are the only two considerations, but the money is still protected through portability. So those are some real advantages, and those are things that solidify the primary objective most people have when they do pre-plan. And the primary objective, what would you think that would be? If people were going to pre-plan, why would you think they would do it primarily? What's that? Right, so their children wouldn't have to. You're not worrying about how it's going to be for them to make all those decisions. So peace of mind. I mean, really for everybody's peace of mind. So with those extra protections written into the rules, it kind of solidifies that peace of mind in doing what you're doing and knowing that no matter what the eventuality becomes, if I'm someplace else or however that goes, it's still protected. The money is still going to be able to be there to be used the way that I wanted it to be used. And you accomplish what you set out to do. So again, starting with that conversation with your family and then with the funeral provider who can tell you what all of the elements that would go into a package to comprise what you're envisioning would be, give you the local cost structures because your local people know what local pricing is, right? And then making that plan. And if you decide to go ahead and fund, well then here at O'Connell's, they are fully licensed and credentialed with the insurance as well. So if you want to use that mechanism, they have the credentialing needed to help you through the rest of that process too. So with that, that's kind of my Cliff Notes version of how that all works. But if you have questions, I'm more than happy to take those from you and I'll be here to talk. Sure, you have one now?
You said, like, what you put in for pre-planning, it's not part of the look back if something happened to somebody.
Exactly, right, because the fact is it's not considered a divestment because of the fact that you're making a purchase at what they call fair market value. So you're actually buying those items and the state views it as a purchase and you're getting those items at the fair market value because the funeral provider has to give you the price structure from his general price list. And there's rules from the Federal Trade Commission that govern how those are set up and when they need to be handed out and so on. So it's a purchase. You're just not taking delivery right now. So that's why it's not a divestment. And so there is no regard for that 5-year look back period. So you could actually qualify the very next day once you've separated yourself from the asset. Anybody else?